When a war begins far from home, the effects do not always stay far away. Sometimes they arrive quietly, not in the language of diplomacy, but in the cost of a tank of fuel, in the price of groceries, in the heating bill, and eventually, in the question millions of older people begin to ask, what will this mean for next year's pension rise? In the United Kingdom, the state pension is protected by the so-called triple lock. It was designed to stop pensioners falling behind the rest of society. But in a world where geopolitical shocks can move energy markets in a matter of hours, even a policy built for stability can become part of a larger economic puzzle. And that is where the uncertainty begins. The triple lock is simple in principle but powerful in practice. Each year, the state pension rises by whichever is highest: earnings growth, consumer price inflation, or 2.5%. That formula has become one of the most politically sensitive parts of the welfare system. For millions of retirees, it is not an abstract policy. It is the difference between keeping up and falling behind. But when international tensions raise oil prices, the impact can spread through an economy quickly. Transport becomes more expensive. Goods cost more to move. Businesses face higher operating costs. Inflation can accelerate. And if inflation rises sharply, the pressure on pension uprating grows with it. The question is not whether global conflict affects domestic life. History already answers that. The question is how far, how fast, and who ends up carrying the cost. History shows a clear pattern. When conflict threatens major energy-producing regions or the shipping routes that connect them, markets react. First, the oil shocks of the 1970s remain one of the clearest examples. Supply disruption did not just raise fuel prices, it fed inflation across entire economies and changed public policy for years afterward. Since then, economists have repeatedly found the same basic mechanism at work. Energy is not just another commodity. It is a core input for transport, farming, manufacturing, logistics, and household heating. When energy prices rise, the cost of nearly everything else can follow. That is why wars and regional crises matter far beyond the battlefield. They can alter inflation expectations, affect central bank decisions, and shape how governments plan their budgets. For pensioners, the connection is especially important. Older households often spend a larger share of their income on essentials, such as energy, transport, and food. That makes them more exposed when prices rise quickly. The triple lock was introduced to ensure the state pension would not lose value over time. Its logic is straightforward. If wages are rising strongly, pensioners should share in that growth. If inflation is running higher than wages, pensions should protect purchasing power. And if both are weak, the pension still rises by at least 2.5%. This has made the policy popular with pensioners and politically difficult for governments to change. But the same formula can create tension during periods of volatility. Why? Because inflation is not a neutral number in real life. It is shaped by conditions in the wider economy. If global conflict pushes fuel prices up, and that feeds into broader inflation, the triple lock may deliver a larger pension rise the following year. That sounds beneficial on the surface, but there is a catch. A larger pension increase can also mean greater pressure on public finances at the same time as the government faces higher spending elsewhere, including support for households, transport, and public services affected by inflation. So the triple lock can protect pensioners while also becoming part of a much bigger fiscal dilemma. To understand the mechanism, imagine the chain step by step. First, a conflict involving Iran or the wider region creates concern about energy supply, shipping lanes, or wider instability. Second, oil markets react. Traders price in risk, and prices can rise even before any physical disruption occurs. Third, businesses face higher fuel and transport costs. Those costs often spread through supply chains. Fourth, consumer inflation begins to move upward, especially if food, utilities, and transport become more expensive. Fifth, the following year's pension uprating comes under pressure because the triple lock is linked to inflation and earnings. This does not mean every spike in oil immediately causes a large pension increase. The system is more complicated than that. Inflation is measured over time, and the final uprating depends on official statistics rather than headlines. But the broad pattern is real. Conflict can influence inflation. Inflation can influence pension. Uprating and pension uprating can influence government spending. That is the chain behind the warning. For some people, this debate feels technical. For others, it is deeply personal. A pensioner does not experience inflation as a macroeconomic trend. They experience it as a bus fare that has gone up again, a weekly shop that costs more than last month, a winter fuel bill that forces trade-offs between heating and other essentials. That is why pension policy carries such emotional weight. It is not only about economics, it is about dignity, security, and trust. When experts warn that a conflict could have a significant impact, they are usually not speaking only about markets. They are speaking about the way shocks travel through a society that is already under strain, and older households are often among the first to feel it. There are a few things we can say with confidence. 1. Wars and regional crises can affect oil prices. 2. Oil prices can contribute to inflation. 3. Inflation matters to state pension uprating under the triple lock. 4. Pensioners are especially vulnerable to higher living costs. But there are also important limits. It is not possible to predict precisely how any specific conflict will affect next year's pension increase. The outcome depends on the duration of the conflict, the severity of any energy disruption, global demand, currency movements, wage growth, and government policy. This is why caution matters. A headline can suggest a direct line from war to pension rise, but real economies do not work in straight lines. They work through delays, feedback loops, and competing forces. That is also why experts often speak in probabilities rather than certainties. Many economists argue that the most important effect of a geopolitical shock is not the initial price jump, but what happens afterward. If households expect inflation to remain high, they may spend differently. Businesses may raise prices more aggressively. Wage negotiations may adjust. Central banks may keep interest rates higher for longer. Borrowing may remain expensive, and that can slow growth while keeping the cost of living elevated. In that environment, even if fuel prices stabilize, the broader inflationary pressure can continue. Some analysts would describe this as a second-order effect. The conflict does not simply raise oil prices, it changes expectations across the whole economy. Others would be more cautious and note that modern energy markets are more flexible than in previous decades. Strategic reserves, diversified supply, and policy intervention can soften the blow. Both views matter. The real answer often lies somewhere between panic and complacency. The triple lock was built to solve one problem: the erosion of pension value. Over time. But over the years, its defenders and critics have raised a harder question. In a volatile world, can any fixed formula fully protect retirees without creating new pressures elsewhere? If inflation surges, the pension rises. That helps older people. But if inflation is partly driven by external shocks, the fiscal bill grows too. And if governments try to weaken the triple lock, they risk undermining confidence among people who rely on it most. This is the policy trap at the center of the story. A mechanism designed for fairness can become difficult to sustain when the global environment turns unstable. That does not make the triple lock useless. It makes it a reminder that social policy cannot be separated from geopolitics. The most powerful effects of war are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are gradual, measured in cents, pence, and percentages, felt in monthly routines, seen in the gap between what a policy promises and what a household can comfortably afford. That is why the warning matters, not because every conflict produces the same outcome. It does not. Not because the triple lock is broken, it is not. But because the lives of pensioners are tied to a world larger than any one country, and that world can change quickly. A conflict in one region can move fuel markets. Fuel markets can move inflation. Inflation can shape pension uprating, and pension uprating can shape the financial security of millions. So the real mystery is not whether global events matter. They do. The deeper question is this: in an age of Persistent instability. How much protection can any national policy truly provide? And when the next pension rise is announced, will it reflect prosperity, resilience, or simply the cost of a world that has become harder to predict?